Welcome to another live iThemes Training live stream. My name is Nathan Ingram. I'm the host here at iThemes Training, and I'm joined today by Timothy Jacobs. Timothy is the lead developer at SolidWP. That is the new name of iThemes. If you haven't been following that, iThemes is rebranding to SolidWP. Timothy is our lead developer, and he is also a core committer and one of the maintainers of the WordPress REST API. Welcome, Timothy. Glad you're back with us today.
Thanks for having me, Nathan. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So this is an intriguing title. We were talking about it in the pre-show of Let's Kill the Password, all about passkeys today. So I was thinking back to the very first conversation we had about passkeys. Probably, it's been about a year ago, I guess, sometime around
More
there.
than that, we launched Passkeys, I think, in August of 2022.
Yeah. So we were talking then about this miraculous new thing of passkeys that will make the days of these long, complicated passwords that nobody can seem to remember and password managers that, you know, novice users have trouble implementing, and people instead tend to just go back to their favorite password that they use on everything. So just give us an overview. You know, if you had to answer what are passkeys, what are they?
Well, they're the future of authentication, Nathan. So passkeys are basically another way that you can log into a site without using a password. And they utilize some cool stuff called public-private key cryptography, which we're not really going to get into. But that's part of kind of where the key comes from. But yeah, they're another form of logging in. And over the next 40 slides or so, we'll dive into what that means.
Very good. So the ultimate end of this for the typical user, particularly with the way passkeys are being implemented in iThemes Security and Solid Security, that'll be coming in about a month or so. You'll be able to log into WordPress without a password.
Exactly.
It will recognize you and log you right in. So especially for those of you that are working with clients, this is a delightful thing because clients tend to really struggle in many cases with keeping those complicated or complex, unique passwords for every website. And so this is going to help us along. So if you are just joining us, let me do a little bit of housekeeping and we'll turn things over to Timothy. If you're just joining us, welcome. We're glad you're here. Pop open the Zoom and say hi and tell us where you're logging in from. Therein, you will find the link once again to today's slides, as well as the replay. So this is being recorded now. We'll have this up ready for your review, or if you'd like to share it with others, the link, it'll take about an hour for us to get the video rendered and placed. In about an hour, you can share that link that's there in the link bundle in the chat, and you'll be able to rewatch and share. Also, we invite you to ask questions throughout today's live stream. Please use the Zoom Q&A button. So if you mouse over the shared screen, the Zoom icons will appear. Hit the Q&A, and that will open up the Q&A window. I'd recommend you just keep that open. And as you see other people asking questions and you have that same question, click the thumbs up icon, and we'll be taking those questions in the order of upvotes at the end of today's live stream. So with that, I'll be quiet. Timothy, let's talk about passkeys.
Awesome. So yes, let's kill the password is the title of this talk, just a little bit provocative. But we're going to be talking all about passkeys, which I think are the future of authentication. So studies have shown that over 80% of all hacking-related breaches are attributed to password compromises. That's a really large number. And if you think about it, that's because passwords kind of suck. They are an authentication mechanism that we've been stuck with for 60 years, and they're not a very great one at that. So what kind of are the problems with passwords? Well, they're weak. A lot of people are just going to use weak passwords. You know, we still see the reports of the most popular common passwords, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 password, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we tried to kind of like make this experience better. And we started saying, hey, we're going to require you to have a strong password. And so we have these password meters that say like, hey, this is a strong password or it's not a strong password. But people found out they could, you know, come up with one kind of strong password and just keep using that password on all of their sites. And so you'd have one password that logs you into your WordPress site, your Chase site, your Amazon, all of your different online accounts. Maybe if you were particularly clever, you would change out Amazon in your password name to Chase or something like that. You had your like common password parts and your common password formula or something like that. But those really aren't particularly great. The big problem is that when those passwords become stolen passwords, then the one password that you use that got compromised at xyzretailer.com means that your Amazon account, your Chase account is compromised, your entire digital identity becomes compromised. The other big problem with passwords is phishing. So we have all of these things of, hey, make sure that you're going to the correct website. Make sure that you're entering in the password in the place that you think you're doing. And that kind of just revolves around, be careful, don't mess up, don't ever make a mistake, don't ever enter in your password in the wrong place. You might get all these different phishing test messages if you're working at one of those large organizations or even small organizations these days that try and trick you into giving up your password to a site that isn't the real site. And some of those phishing pages can be really quite persuasive. And we'll see a couple of examples of that in this talk. So how do we move past passwords? Well, we started to think like, hey, how are the different ways that we can make this better? And we did that by introducing two-factor. And so two-factor is definitely, it's the strongest protection available. This is where you log into your site and you say, hey, give me an authentication code that proves that you have something. And so the things that we preach the best are these different authenticator apps, but a lot of them also have backup methods like email and things like that. And the problem, though, is that while two-factor definitely improves things, this is a report from Microsoft. They found that only 22% of their Azure Active Directory accounts actually have strong authentication practices in place. These are large businesses that are using Microsoft's products, and only 22% of them. This isn't just like, protecting your social media account. These are companies that just don't have a strong authentication system set up. Microsoft is talking about a combination of like two-factor and passwordless when they say strong authentication, but only 22% they found. A report from the UK found that only 37% of businesses had policies in place for enforcing two-factor. And so if we think about that, why might two-factor adoption, even though we've had it for decades now, be so low? And one of the big reasons is that the user experience is pretty confusing. What we often recommend is the mobile app version. If you're familiar probably with Authy or Google Authenticator, this is an app that you download to your phone and you can type in a code and manage your whole network of different codes there. But that's a little bit confusing if you've tried to teach someone how to use this who isn't the most technically savvy person. It's not the easiest thing to explain. And so we came up with better versions of this, like email, for instance, that kind of try and make that user experience a bit better. Instead of needing to worry about an additional app, you just, hey, enter in your username and password, and then a code gets emailed to you. But that experience still isn't that great. This is kind of in a different realm. This is from Twitter's reporting. And so Twitter says that 2.6% of Twitter accounts have two-factor on their site. And so you might say that, hey, my Twitter account isn't the most important thing in the world, though I think someone being able to tweet as you and send DMs as you or view your message history might be a little bit alarming. So 2.6% of accounts, that feels very, very low. And I found these, what I found pretty funny tweets over on Twitter, people complaining about the perils of two-factor authentication. From Ashley, the average American wastes 66 years of their life on two-factor authentication. This from Skidmore, why does two-factor authentication feel like 17-factor authentication? Another 2FA is the one thing I really hate. This user experience just clearly is something that people aren't happy with and clearly aren't satisfied with. And I think that's a large reason why we're seeing such low adoption across the board. For a long time, basically, the way that we've kind of encouraged people to use two-factor is this kind of like shame-based approach of like, hey, two-factor, it's the only thing you can do to protect yourself. I found this summed up in this pretty funny headline. Point counterpoint, two-factor authentication is the only thing between me and hackers trying to ruin my life versus it's annoying to do. But clearly we know that it is annoying to do, and just shaming people into, using better security has not been effective for the past, infinite years of web security. Even though if you have two-factor and you have it enabled, surprisingly, you can still be susceptible to phishing attacks, which I think is pretty wild. Here's a cool example that I found. So what phishing attacks do is we're trying to trick the user into giving up their password to someone who doesn't actually want it. And so some of the ways that this can be done is just using pop-ups. Pop-ups these days can be very, very clever. This is an example here where they are kind of spoofing this idea of, hey, I want to sign in with my Microsoft account. And in this case, the website is actually popping up a fake pop-up that looks just like their browser window to say, hey, type in your password into your Microsoft account here. It looks exactly like it. And if you're not careful, you wouldn't notice the difference. Here is an even more advanced version. This is using a tool called Evil Nginx. And what we're seeing here is a website that looks exactly like Microsoft's login system. And that's kind of because it is Microsoft's login system. So this is a system that an attacker has set up that exists on its own domain. The only way you would know this is unsafe is because if you're paying extra close attention to the URL. But as this user is entering their username, they're entering their password, the login page is being customized based off of the corporation that they're logging into. Their two-factor codes here are being properly prompted for, and they're entering it into a website that looks identical to what Microsoft's real website is. And so we're going to see this person enter in their two-factor code here. And what's actually happening is it's being sent off to Microsoft servers. It's presenting the real Microsoft UI. And the only thing that you know is if you pay close attention up at the top of the URL there, that this is actually cyberfish.xyz instead of Microsoft.com. And so, of course, attackers can be much more clever these days with URLs that look more real than they actually are. And I find this demo pretty kind of alarming. I think it'd be really easy to make this mistake, to think that, hey, you're logging into the correct site, you're using two-factor, but you're actually being logged into an attacker's site. And so the thing that you kind of have to remember is that attackers only need to succeed once. If an attacker is trying to trick you into giving up your username and password, once they have your username and password, it's done. You have to be vigilant every single time you're logging in. And that's just not really feasible. Maybe we're doing 15 things at once. Maybe it's the 40th hour of the day and we've been, working and working and working and working, and we're just tired and we weren't as extra vigilant as we had to be. Having a system where you need to be successful 100% of the time to stop an attacker, and it's all on you as the human to not make a mistake, that's bound to fail at some point for a lot of us. So we came up with this next kind of system, which is passwordless logins. And so what these systems let you do is they let you skip your password and they let you skip a two-factor authentication code. And they try and give you a pretty simple user experience. You just enter in the email address that you want to log in as. And then you're sent a code in your email, something usually that looks like this. And you go back to the website and you enter in their code. Problem is, email is kind of slow. It's not the best experience ever to need to open up and wait in your email inbox. I know I have contemplated not purchasing something because it was taking like minutes upon minutes upon minutes for me to get my two-factor or passwordless login link via my email. It just takes a long time. And honestly, even then, passwordless login, while it's phishing resistant, we are kind of not tricking you into entering in your password onto a site because you don't have a password. You still can be tricked sometimes into clicking the wrong link. This was a sign-in link for LinkedIn that I got. And you can see the approximate location there was Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And if an attacker was sending me one of those links and I clicked on it, the only thing that I would really need to know is look at that approximate location and say, hey, is that where I am? The problem is that the approximate location things in these very rarely work. When I was taking this screenshot, I was actually in a train going to upper New York State, and I would have ignored that location warning anyway. So it's easy to say, hey, okay, am I supposed to click on this link or not? Someone requested this. Maybe I'm supposed to log in. Was an app going there? It's still easy to make a mistake using this passwordless login technology. So what we have now, though, is a solution that I think solves pretty much all of these problems, which is Passkeys. And so this is a short little demo of logging into a Google account using a passkey. All I needed to do was click one button and I got logged in, which is kind of incredible. Here's another example, which is from iTheme Security and logging into your WordPress site. I'm just entering in the username that I want to log in as. I click use my passkey and I'm logged in immediately. So what's actually happening here? What are passkeys? Passkeys are another way to authenticate with a site. And they're a way of saying, this is who I am. They don't require passwords. They don't require that you use two-factor authentication. They're able to provide a one-click login experience that is very fast, and I think has a user experience, particularly getting better every year as our devices get newer and newer. That is easy for a lot of people to understand. You don't have to have a separate app. It's built completely into your OS. You don't have anything else to worry about. You just say, hey, I want to log in, and it asks you if you want to log in. Passkeys are also phishing proof. That's kind of like a big bar to ever say that, hey, anything is like phishing proof or anything proof. But passkeys are actually phishing proof is the language that companies like Apple use, because it won't let you log into the wrong site. There's no way that you can make a mistake. So passkeys are also called, you may have heard, the WebAuthn standard or web authentication. This was born out of the FIDO Alliance, who have been working in this area for years and years and years. Passkeys and this latest iteration of passwordless login has been born out of 6 years of development. So it's gone through multiple iterations at this point and has been getting better and better and better each time. This is one of these tools that is actually, we rarely see these days, but is actually backed by all the big tech companies. This is backed by Apple. This is backed by Google, and this is even backed by Microsoft. And at this point, it's supported by all major browsers. So I mentioned up at the front a little bit about this. We're not going to get in too deep, but how do passkeys work? Well, they work using this technology called public key cryptography. And so this is something that you are using every day on the web, on your computers and your iPhones, whether you know it or not. It's used for things like SSL and TLS. When you go to a site and it says HTTPS versus HTTP, that is public key cryptography. When you're doing software updates, almost all software updates that are out there, WordPress is the exception, but almost all software updates that are out there, they actually do signing to say that, hey, is this code signed by who I think it should be? And if so, they reject it. That uses public key cryptography. And you'll just see this all the time happening in the background. It's something that you really wouldn't even need to be aware of as you're going about your life. So what does the registration process look like? Well, kind of like at an architectural layer, what's happening is we're saying our device is the blue on the right-hand side, and the computer that we're logging into is the green browser window on the left. And so what we're saying is when we go to a website, we want to say, hey, I want to register and create a new account. And what the computer says to your device is send me a public key. And your phone is going to create that public key pair for you. And it's going to send that public key to the website that you're registering with. At no point did you need to do anything in this process. The device took care of it all by itself. You don't need to think about this key, but it's just this key that's been created that now lives in your device, and all of that is happening in the background. When we see this in action, it looks something like this. This is Google's page that lets you create a passkey for your Google account. And so I say, hey, I want to create a passkey. I click the create a passkey button, and that's it. My browser is going to prompt me and say, hey, are you sure you want to create a passkey? And when I say yes, you can see that a passkey has been added to my Google account. We can watch that go through one more time. Whoop. See, I'm getting prompted. I'm going to click continue. And that's all I need to do. So what happens when it's time for me to log in? Well, we go over to that website and say, hey, I want to sign in. Now, what the website does is it sends back what we call a challenge. It's a piece of randomly generated data, and it wants you to sign it with that private key that was generated in the previous step. And so what happens is the phone takes care of this. It creates a signature with a private key. It sends that signature and just the signature over to the website. And the website is able to say, okay, knowing your public key and the signature and the data that I sent you as that challenge, I'm able to put all these things together and verify that you are who you said you are. And again, this happens without you needing to think about it at all. So we can see again in the Google flow here, this is how I'm logging into my Google account using a passkey. I entered in my email address. I said I wanted to log in, and Google presented me a UI that says use your passkey. My browser said, are you sure you want to log in? And I logged in. I didn't have to think about that public key, private key stuff. It's all something that your phone and your devices are handling for you. So summarizing here, they work using public key cryptography. Your passkey is actually a public-private key pair. And your device, your phone or your computer, is in charge of keeping your private key safe. It's not something you need to do. You're never going to write down your private key. You're never going to manage to memorize your private key. You're not going to put it in a safety deposit box, anything like that. It's something that your device keeps safe. Your device then is going to guard this private key using your device passcode and biometrics. So I've seen some questions about like, how does this compare to fingerprint logins and stuff like that? What actually happens if you're using, for instance, an iPhone or a Mac with Touch ID is that they use those biometrics by you authenticating with your face or by you pressing your thumb on your thumbprint reader. That's what tells your device that, okay, I can release this private key to do some signing. You don't have to worry about it. Your device takes care of it for you. What happens is the website then gets this public key, and that public key, it's like it says in the word, it's public. You could share that public key with anyone in the world. There's nothing that the website needs to keep safe. There's nothing that the website needs to keep secret or private. And whenever you log in, the site then asks you to sign that challenge with your private key. Your device is going to prompt you to authenticate, usually using a thumbprint, a Face ID match, things like that. It'll sign that challenge and send it over to the website. Nothing you need to do in the background. So how do passkeys work with account takeover and phishing? So there are two things that happen with phishing attacks. And there's kind of a thing to think about of like the different motivations that attackers have. So one thing that I want to make very clear is that no personal information is ever leaving your device. So even though you may authenticate with your Face ID or your Touch ID, the website isn't getting a copy of your face. The website isn't getting a copy of your thumbprint. So an attacker doesn't have anything that they can really steal from the website that would be useful for them in terms of authentication data. When you create a passkey, it's different on every single site. So an attacker can't go and hack xyz.com, steal all of their passwords, and try and use them on abc.com. They're completely separate from each other, and there's nothing sensitive like biometric data that they want to be compromised. The other thing is that you can't actually be tricked into giving up your password. So we say all the time, hey, make sure that you're logging into the right site. And if you look at these different screenshots here, we can see that there is this kind of remnant of make sure you're logging into the right site. It says, do you want to sign into security.test as admin? And in Google Chrome, we have a similar bit of UI here that says Google Chrome is trying to verify your identity on security.test. And here is another dialogue from Microsoft saying a similar thing. But the thing to keep in mind here is that if you don't have credentials for hackermicrosoft.com, then you will never be able to log in with your Microsoft.com credentials. Your browser only knows that this is the specific site that you can log in with these credentials, and it makes it impossible for you to override your browser and say, no, I know what I'm doing. I need to put in my password. I'm going to go ahead and do it even though the browser isn't autofilling for me or things like that. It's actually just impossible for you to put that information into the wrong place. The browser knows that, hey, are we on the correct domain? If we're not going to let you do anything about that. So a little bit more about passkeys. There are two kind of general spheres in which they land with WebAuthn, passkeys, passwordless authentication. There are platform authenticators, which is kind of where the passkey language is moving to. These are things that are built into your computer or smartphone. They use biometrics like Touch ID, Face ID, or Windows Hello. And then there are also roaming authenticators. So these are separate hardware devices. They connect with Bluetooth, USB, NFC, things like that. Oftentimes, these are like YubiKeys or Titan keys. I have one of them. I've been a user for a long time. These also use the same kind of like WebAuthn technology, but it isn't typically what we're referring to with passkeys. They're more there for advanced users and advanced use cases. They aren't the things that I would be recommending people to go out and get. You want to focus on the platform authenticators, which are becoming available more and more every day. So what does the browser support for this look like? It's pretty good. If you're using up-to-date operating systems at this point, you have it pretty much everywhere. The only real exception is Firefox on macOS. But passkeys are becoming more and more available. Just make sure you're running the latest versions of your operating systems. One of the things that you may need if you're on a Windows device, you may need a Windows computer that is also compatible with Windows Hello. So if that is a feature that is available to you, then you should also be able to access passkey functionality on your Windows machines. Whoa. Are we still here? Yes. Okay. Sorry, weird glitch. So I'm going to talk about passkeys in a couple of the different ecosystems that exist. The first is Apple. So if you're using passkeys with your Apple devices, you should know that passkeys are stored in iCloud. And so what this means is that they are synced across all of the devices that you're logged into iCloud with. So if you have an iPhone, an iPad, a desktop Mac, a laptop Mac, an Apple Watch, all those different devices, iCloud takes care of sharing your passkey that you created on any one of those sites and sending it to all of the different sites, all the different devices that you have. And so you don't need to think about, hey, I logged in with my Mac. How do I log in with my phone? The passkey will be shared everywhere. These work best in Safari. Apple has kind of talked about some plans to let other people integrate with how Apple stores passkeys in the keychain and things like that. I would say at this point, if you are an Apple user, if you're in the Apple ecosystem and you want to use passkeys, that Safari is the best place for you to be. You can also share passkeys. So this is a dialog prompt where you can share passkeys using AirDrop. And so that lets you say, hey, I want to share my login to the site. I don't need to give them a username and a password. I can just share this passkey. And because they have that private key, then they can log into the site. So it actually provides, I think, an even nicer experience of sharing passwords than we had in the past of, okay, how do I share this password with someone else who should be using my login? Well, I'm going to write it down and we have to remember them, something like that. But here you can share them out. So the Google ecosystem is similar. Passkeys are stored in Google Password Manager, which is what Google is already using if you save your passwords to Chrome. Again, they're synced across all of your devices where you're logged in with your Google account. And if you're in the Google ecosystem, it works best with Chrome, which is, I think, pretty much what we expect here. We can see an example of this process using an Android phone from Google's articles here. So you can see it's a similar thing. I'm saying I want to use a passkey and I touch ID with my device. Another is Windows. So Windows is managed by Windows Hello. Right now, these are either credentials that are stored on your particular device, or they're using a hardware key like a YubiKey. Microsoft has said that cross-device syncing is coming sometimes in 2023. I also saw that there are there are Microsoft preview builds of Windows 11 that have kind of more passkey functionality built into them. What I would say right now at this moment, if you are a Windows user and you want to use passkeys, that Google Chrome is still the place where you'll get the best support. But this should be getting better in the next couple of months as Microsoft works out those final bits. So how about if you are a multi-platform user or multi-platform household? So a big thing to remember is that browsers support using a passkey from a nearby device. So you don't even have to be logging in with the computer that you normally use. Let's say you're traveling and you're using a friend's computer and you want to log in. You can still use your passkey if you have your phone with you. Basically what happens is this little UI pops up that says, hey, let's connect with a phone. And you scan this QR code with your phone, and that creates a secure connection that lets you share that passkey. The other thing to keep in mind, if you do have multiple devices in different platforms that you own, is that user accounts can have multiple passkeys. So for instance, a lot of my accounts, I have a Google passkey for my Google ecosystem, and I have a passkey that I created for my Apple ecosystem. And my Apple ecosystem gets shared through all of my different Apple accounts, and the Google ecosystem gets shared through my different Google accounts. The other thing that's really cool that's changed since last time we talked about passkeys is password managers are now starting to support this. So this is a screenshot from 1Password, which currently has beta support for passkeys itself. So if you are a 1Password user because you want to be able to use a password manager across all your devices, and maybe you don't find the built-in password management capabilities that Google offers or Apple offers or Microsoft offers, but you're using something like 1Password, you can use passkeys too. 1Password basically presents its own UI. And so you can see this screenshot here from eBay's site, which is using Passkeys, and you can try it out. And your passkey will get saved to your 1Password account, your 1Password vault, and then you can do with that as you please. You can share it. You can use it across multiple different browsers. You can use it across multiple different operating systems. And you now are sharing your passkey in one place, and it's kind of divorced from being stuck in the Apple ecosystem, stuck in the Google ecosystem. It's very, very cross-platform. So here's another example of logging in cross-platform. This is on a Windows computer. Let's say you're visiting a friend who has a Windows computer and you're using your iPhone. This prompt comes up that says, hey, would you like to authenticate with your phone? You can take out your phone, point the camera at the QR code, and say sign in with your passkey. And your phone will prompt you to say, are you sure you want to do this? And if so, you click continue. And we're logged in. This other example is in the Google side of the ecosystem here. So we can see that I'm trying to log into this site using a passkey on my Android phone. And you can see this Android phone over here on the left is pointing to the QR code on the website. They go through this connection process. It asks me if I want to use my passkey. I have to authenticate with my phone to prove I'm really there. And then I got logged into my bank using a passkey. So where can you use passkeys? The really big story that happened this year is for International Password Day. Google rolled out passkeys to all of the Google accounts. So if you have a Gmail address, you can go right now into your Gmail account security center and try out passkeys immediately. The other places you can use them are Microsoft, PayPal, eBay, and you can also use it using WordPress. So if you're using iTheme security, you can enable passkeys and you'll be able to log into your WordPress site using passkeys, which I think is pretty cool. So why should you adopt passkeys right now? Well, I'd say that it's faster to use than passwords and two-factor authentication. You don't need to use a separate app. You don't need to remember and type in a long password. It's an experience that is built entirely into your device and usually happens with just one click, one touch, one scan of your face. For those of you with clients, it's really important to help your clients keep themselves secure. I don't know how many times that I might have a 32-character long password on my WordPress site for my client, but then I see that my client is using their name 1234 as their password, and I'm like, oh my God. So really, we talked up at the front, 80% or so of attacks and related breaches are related to having weak passwords. So if your clients are using a bad password, the fact that you're using a strong password doesn't matter. They're going to get in, the attackers are going to get in through your client's bad password. So you want to help keep your client secure by setting them up with using passkeys. And I think it's also important to be on the forefront of new technology. When you're talking to your clients, you want to be able to say that, hey, I'm an expert on this. I am keeping up to date. I am making sure that, hey, you heard about this passkeys thing on the news on one hand, one-off comment. Come to me and I can tell you exactly how we can set it for your WordPress site, or even show the initiative and say, hey, we should set this up for you. It's going to be easier than the two-factor that I've been trying to get you to use for years. And it's going to be easier than typing in that long password by hand. Let's get you set up with passkeys. So to come back to the title of our talk, I guess there's a phrase of newspaper analysis of if there's a headline with a question mark, the answer is no. So I'd say, is the password debt? Well, not yet, but we're getting there. We are getting close. This is, I think, truly one of the leaps and bounds that we've seen of how are we actually going to make authentication easier for folks? And we've been saying, hey, you just got to be careful. You just have to use a random password, just use a password manager, just use two-factor authentication, all these different things. And we haven't seen much adoption for it, but we are finally getting there. But until passwords are actually dead, you got to keep using strong ones, not to get back on the shame-based education strategy. But until you're using passkeys everywhere, you have to keep using strong passwords. You have to be setting up two-factor for yourself and your clients. And you really should be using a password manager, either the one that's built into your operating system or a trusted one like 1Password, etc. And so that is Passkeys. I have a couple of frequently asked questions that are here, but we'll see if I've anticipated any of them correctly. And I can hop to those slides. But it's time to dive into your all's questions.
Love it. Okay, so folks, if you haven't done it yet, please open up the Q&A window there in Zoom. Take a look at the questions that have been asked. If you have a question to ask, drop it in there, or upvote the questions of others that you also would like to hear answered. And as you folks are doing that, Timothy, I've got some questions.
Yes.
So how do you deal with, you talked about sharing the passkey if you're on an Apple device with AirDrop. That's pretty cool. What if, like I've got 2 laptops and a phone and a tablet, and how do you manage all that? I guess you could, if you're in Apple exclusively, you could AirDrop, but what if you're not? What if you have a mix of devices?
So if you're in Apple exclusively, you don't even need to AirDrop because you'll be able to have those passkeys synced automatically. So if you've got a Mac, an iPhone, an iPad, multiple Macs, like I do, they'll get synced automatically for you. So you don't even have to worry about AirDropping. If you are in a cross device household and you have things on multiple platforms, you have 2 good options. One, each of the different ecosystems has a way to sync things. So for all your Apple devices, my recommendation is to create a passkey on one of them, and it'll be shared across all of them. And then on all of your Android or Google devices, to create another 1 passkey, and Google will sync it across all of your accounts. And so you're going to wind up in your user account having 2 passkeys, 1 for Apple and 1 for Google, and they'll be shared everywhere. You also, though, in like the next coming weeks, is the ability to use password managers. So one of the reasons that people do use password managers is because they exist in a world that is more complicated than what just Apple or Google would like to imagine that we live in, where we only use their products. And so password managers do provide this great cross-platform experience. They still become very, very easy because you just get this little pop-up that says, hey, do you want to log in? And it's just as secure, and you don't need to worry about 2-factor authentication. But if you're using 1Password's beta, for instance, you'll be able to share your passkey across your Google devices, your Android devices, your Windows devices, etc. So it the answer is multivariate. And for the most power users among us, use most disparate devices, still using something like a password manager can be helpful. But you can absolutely do it all in a first-party manner.
Yeah, interesting. So passkeys they're relying on the security of the device itself, right? So how important then is like guarding against malware in a passkey world?
So that's an interesting question. It varies depending on the device. So I would say always, if you use 2-factor and if you use passwords and your device is infected with malware, well, we've got keyloggers, and keyloggers will pick up your password. They'll pick up your 2-factor code. And most of the sites that use 2-factor, they don't, we see that timeline ticking down. That's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and then another 6 codes appear. But almost all the sites, they don't stop you immediately after those 6 codes, because we have to account for, hey, is the time on your device maybe a few minutes off the time of your server? We don't want the user experience to be bad. So oftentimes an attacker could use that code depending on how 2-factor is implemented, or they can just steal your session. So if your local device is infected, you got a problem. I would say that passkeys actually make this solution a bit better. A keylogger attack, for instance, isn't going to be susceptible to this. You're not typing anything in. One of the reasons why support for this was a little bit more complicated early on. You can't use this technology, for instance, with a very old Mac, because it doesn't have what's called in the Apple ecosystem a T2 chip. And these are security chips that exist on our computers. It's pretty common in all the modern devices, all of your new phones, et cetera, all of them have them. And their number one job is holding on to and protecting secrets. So even if in this case that some malware got in your phone, the hope is that your key would still be safe in the hardware security module in your actual device. That's a little bit of blurring, but you have these different T2 chips that are kind of protecting this information there. So as always, if you have a compromised device and you log into your site, they can do things like steal your cookies, steal the passwords you're typing in. I would say passkeys make this a little bit better, but again, it's kind of chain link fence type of scenario that if your device gets compromised, they can do a lot, even if they don't need to steal your passkey.
Yeah. And so that's what answers Sue's first question here, which is where are the passkeys stored? And they're in these security chips, these magic chips
Exactly.
in the
Yeah.
hardware.
So you may
Interesting.
have heard of like the Apple Secure Enclave and this kind of terminology that's been thrown out there. And so, yes, that is kind of one of the things that is required. If you are using a hardware one, for instance, you might have a YubiKey and it's stored in here. But we have these chips in our phones and our computers that are kind of specifically designed for this type of stuff.
So if I understand all this correctly, and I'm taking the host prerogative here of asking a bunch of questions that I have,
Yeah.
I think other people may have these as well, but if I'm understanding this correctly, then the issue with passkeys it's not so much now, I've got to have a complex, unique password on all the sites and all these things. It really becomes more about device security. So I can't have 1234 as my Mac password, right, to log in. Because if I lose my device and someone else gets access to it, then they potentially have the passkey. Is that right?
Well, it depends. So if you have an iPhone, for instance, someone could steal my iPhone, but they don't have my face. So that's why a lot of these things have the authentication that is built into your device. And that's kind of what talks to the secure enclave. So they need to authenticate with my face, authenticate with my thumbprint, things like that. They also, when you're using things like Macs and iPhones and Android phones and things like that, they don't just let you make infinite attempts on logging in. When an attacker compromises the site, they get to slurp up the database and say, okay, I'm going to run on my own computer that is very expensive and very fast, millions and millions and millions of guesses. But you can't try millions and millions and millions of times into iPhones and Android phones. They have built-in protections into their hardware that makes that more complicated. So yes, it's important to keep your device secure as ever. And if you do lose physical access, there's a lot of cases where you say, hey, if you don't have physical access to your device, it's game over. But one of the things that Apple and others are working very hard on is making sure that even if you do lose your device, an attacker can't compromise it. And even if they have all the time in the world.
Yeah, interesting. All right, let's get into some questions others have asked. Christine has and by the way, if you have a question, please use the Zoom Q&A and we'll get those stacked up in the order of upvotes. All right, so Ben's question here, I'm an Apple user, but I don't use Safari on the desktop. Can I still use Passkeys?
Yes, you can use Google Chrome and you can then either use Google's passkey solution or Google will actually save a passkey directly to your computer. So if you're an Apple Watch user like me, they'll prompt you for clicking your watch to log in. But yes, and if you are a 1Password user or some other password managers, you'll be able to use those password managers in the future. If you use Safari, it's just going to give you that iCloud integration where it syncs across everything. But if you don't want to use that because you're a Google Chrome user, you absolutely can.
Yeah, good. And that gets into Ben's next question here, which is using a password manager like Keeper. Keeper is what I use also. It does have pass key support now as well. Most of the major ones do. Yeah, so that would help you with cross devices. Christine says, if you share a login like oh, this is a great question. Okay, so the scenario is my client has given me access to something, right, of theirs. And if in a world that moves to passkeys, how do you deal with that? If you're logging in as your client to some other place.
Yeah, so my recommendation always is actually have different user accounts. So kind of the concept of conflating users as, hey, multiple people might be using this account is really a practice that you want to avoid as much as possible. So I would say that out of the way, it breaks things like, hey, how do we confirm that this is you? It's an email that says, hey, is this really you? We notice you logging into a new location. If you're logging in from multiple locations that are different, it makes those things weaker, things like that. So really, I always recommendation is, hey, actually have separate user accounts. Almost all the platforms these days let you have multiple users. I don't ever want my client's real Stripe account. I want them to invite me as a developer into their Stripe account. So that's always like the #1 security hygiene thing that I recommend. The second thing is that all of the platforms that support having multiple passkeys. So you can go ahead and create your own passkey. And a lot of the platforms, like we saw with AirDrop for Apple, and things like 1Password, which already have password sharing built in, is that you can continue to use those methods. So you can either airdrop it to you, or you can use 1Password's built-in sharing method and copy a sharing link, etc. All of those different tools have ways to say, hey, here's how you would share this out. So you can continue logging into their account if you want to. But that's my order recommendations, basically.
Yeah, interesting. So Christine just followed up with a couple of things here, and the what she's asking about is, you have to pay for an extra license if you want another user, and she's logging into the client's mail. And in all these situations, you would, am I correct in assuming that as platforms begin to implement passkey support, they will likely also implement something like a delegate user also process?
I wouldn't think so because you don't need to. So you would just create a second passkey.
Gotcha.
So all the accounts have to support multiple passkeys. And so any account would let you create a passkey for you, a passkey for another person. And then there's sharing. The passkeys itself is a private key that can be shared securely between people. And so if you're using 1Password, or if you're using the Apple ecosystem, you're using AirDrop, you can just share that around. So yeah, I wouldn't see a kind of like delegation of passkeys. You really would want to have one passkey, I think, per person there. And really you want to have one user account.
Gotcha. And so then we would hope then that as businesses begin to implement passkeys specifically on these things like we're getting questions about, they would have also some sort of a multiple passkey setup for these.
They all do. It's pretty much like a requirement of implementing it correctly. All of them support multiple passkeys because one of the things that passkeys have, slight technical tangent, is there is a field that we get to see as iTheme security, for instance, is this passkey considered backed up? And what some sites that go to exclusively passwordless, where you can't even enter a password if you wanted to, they require that either that passkey has been backed up somewhere, like backed up to iCloud, or that you have a second passkey so that if one passkey ever gets lost because you lose your device, that you have something else. So everyone pretty much supports multiple passkeys. I've never come across an implementation that doesn't.
Yeah. Okay, next question from Sue. When Chrome updates, I get a message like, this is a new browser. Do you want us to trust it, even though it's my computer? And I said, yes. Would that impact a passkey when a browser updates?
It shouldn't, no. So if you're in the Apple ecosystem, the way Apple has this stuff set up is to use Keychain. And so it gets sent into Keychain, and Keychain is something that persists beyond browsers being updated. You can even, if you use like Google Chrome and Chrome Canary and stuff like that, oftentimes they'll share like the same set of passwords and stuff like that. So no, you shouldn't have any kind of trouble of using a new version of software and the passkeys disappearing with it. In the Windows ecosystem, it's a little bit more complicated, but it's part of like how Windows handles authentication. So there shouldn't really be any scenario in which you would just lose them from updating your browser.
And similarly, great question here from Christine. So if I get a new computer or a new phone, do I have to update my, how do you deal with passkeys in that scenario?
Yeah. So if you're in the Apple ecosystem, the first thing that you do when you sign up your new computer is you log into iCloud, and it's the same thing still. You sign into iCloud and all your passkeys will be there. If you're in the Google system, it's the same thing. You get a new Chromebook, you log into your Google account, and all your passkeys will be there. With Windows, again, the situation is a little bit more complicated because they don't have passkeys being synced to Microsoft.com accounts, like Windows Live accounts or whatever. But I think that is something that they are implementing. But if you're on Microsoft, you can just use Google Chrome. And if you use Google Chrome, then they're being shared to your Google account. So you just log into your Google account again.
Yeah. Okay. So Stacy's got a good comment in the chat here. What do you do with the point of view of, I don't want to give Google or Apple or anybody else any more power over my information?
Use a password manager. So if you don't want to be plugged into those ecosystems, you can just use a password manager like 1Password. You're saying KeePass has implemented support, like multiple different password managers can provide support for this. So you can absolutely use a password manager. I'm sure the open source ones as well are adding support for it.
Yeah, very good. John has a question about a demo setting up passkeys and iTheme security. And John, I just dropped a link in the chat to the previous live stream that we did where we walked all the way through that process. It should be very helpful for you. Let's see. Sue is asking if Windows Hello isn't available in my operating system. She's running Windows 10. Can I still use passkeys?
Probably not. That might be the issue that you're running into, Sue. Like, I believe Windows Hello has some specific hardware requirements. I'm not a Windows user, so I apologize for not being able to give the most detailed path to fixing there. But I believe Windows has like some Windows 11 has like some specific hardware requirements for certain features because they need to have certain hardware to do things in the secure way that they would like. And so if you're using an older device, it may not have those particular security features that they need.
Yeah. So the answer is just upgrade to Mac. It's
yeah, you can also just go into the Apple ecosystem or the Google ecosystem. You get the Chromebooks. Apparently, they're quite good.
Yeah. Okay, Christine, this is an interesting question. In a situation where online shopping, right? And as you're checking out, you have the option to make an account and make a passkey. Would you set up a passkey for sites you might not ever visit again?
Yes. So this is the reason why there's so many reasons I like passkeys. This is one that we didn't touch on, we touched on a little bit, which is privacy. So when you create a passkey, so in the world of passwords, you kind of need an email address for two reasons. One, the website probably wants to know your email address so they can send you marketing information. But they also need a way to be able to let you reset your password, things like that. And so it's kind of commonplace to create your username, create your password, create that account. But in a passkey universe, the only thing that gets shared, if we go like all the way back to these slides, is this public key. So send me a public key. That's it. You don't actually even need a username to log into a site that uses passkeys. You can just say, hey, I want to use my passkey, and your browser will pop up the list of all the user accounts you created on that site for you. It's kind of crazy. So sites that care about giving you the options of privacy would be able to have an account that doesn't have an email address associated with it, that just has a way for you to say, boop, this is me. And that's it. So passkeys actually provide an even more compelling experience in terms of privacy possibilities. Now, this is on to the site that you're logging into. If they want to ask you for a username and email before they let you create an account, then they're going to ask you for that email address. But they don't have to. I think that's pretty cool. And nothing, again, like, want to be very clear, the only thing that is sent to that site is your public key. Your biometrics aren't sent, your name isn't sent, your email isn't sent. None of those things are actually given up by your device. So anything else is stuff that you've explicitly said, this is my email address that I want to register with.
Very good. And that actually leads into a question that Nate had dropped in the chat about 10 minutes ago. As a scenario, like, here's a big WordPress site and somebody, they get their somehow, a bad actor is able to infiltrate that site. Is there a scenario where people would have to change their passkeys? And really, that's not even a thing, right? That's not how passkeys work. Yeah,
exactly. The only thing in the database when you're using a passkey is a public key. And I love that's in the name. It is a public key. You could put it on your forehead and there'd be nothing wrong with your security. So yes, that wouldn't be a problem. Now, I'll say this other thing. Right now, for instance, iTheme security, we still let you log in with a password. A lot of different sites out there still let you also use a password. I think it's going to take a little bit more time before people are really familiar with passkeys before we give people the option to say, don't ever let me log into the password. I don't have a password set for my account. There's no need for me to reset anything. It's 128 characters random garbage or something like that. We're not at that point yet. So if, for instance, your WordPress database got compromised, I would still be saying, okay, rotate passwords. But passkeys mean that no, if password gets, if someone's passkey gets compromised because the device gets stolen, it doesn't impact anyone else's. If they see the list of all the passkeys in iTheme security, we store them in a database table. If that database table got leaked somehow, it wouldn't have any impact on your security. You wouldn't need to reset your passkeys, anything like that.
And see, that's the beauty of passkeys. Like, we're, constantly, I'm on the, have I been on database? I'm getting these emails, whatever. That's going to be a thing of the past as soon as this gets broad implementation, which I'm just really happy about.
Exactly.
And on that note, Tom Rafe would like to see your public key on your forehead. Can you accommodate that?
No, I think it's far too many characters. But that
would be a great
maybe I could fit it on
though.
a tattoo on a.
Yeah, right. It would be. I could see it on a T-shirt. That'd be a fun T-shirt.
Here's my passkey shirt.
Let's see, another question here from Nate. Any thoughts on how passkeys might impact HIPAA compliance?
I wouldn't see any reason why they would hurt. So we kind of talked about that stat earlier from Azure about what they use this term of strong authentication. So Azure considers strong authentication passwordless. So you may see, and I would hope to see, HIPAA certifiers starting to say, okay, passwordless is actually where you want to be moving, that you shouldn't be using passwords, and that we would consider passwordless with passkeys to be more secure. They are definitely a more secure option. I'd like to see passwords starting to be flagged as this is a bad practice. Where that lies in like what's a lot of regulation and up to like individual auditors and things like that. I don't know. I couldn't tell you if your auditor would say, hey, you're using passkeys, this is horrible or not. I would presume if they know what they're doing, they wouldn't. But Microsoft actually is one of the ones that does let you, interestingly, create a Microsoft.com account without any password. So they are very much on board the strong authentication being not just a password and two-factor, but also passwordless. And they have a lot of writing in that regard as well.
Yeah, very good. All right, we've reached the end of the questions. It's been a great presentation about the future of the passwordless future as we destroy passwords of all kinds, hopefully in the years to come here. So would it be fair, Timothy, for me to say a good takeaway for people might be start playing around with passkeys? Like we are the people, who are kind of, I mean, if you're on this live stream, you are, a leading edge thinker when it comes to, early adopting tech. It may be that you have clients, and, to get the first step to getting our clients used to using a new thing is to start using that thing ourselves and to get very familiar with it and how it works. And would that be a fair takeaway?
Yes. And up until recently, it's been like, hey, here's a couple of sites. I mentioned passkeys.directory. Almost all of you, I'm sure, have a Google account. Go to your Google account, go in there and go to the passkey section under authentication and try creating a passkey and using it. That would be like my challenge to you. This isn't available, I believe, still for Google Workspace accounts. They have to like figure out permissions on, do we let orgs determine whether or not the users have access, blah, 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 blah. But if you have a Gmail account, you have access to passkeys, and you have since like May something or other, whatever World Password Day is. So go to your Google account, try passkeys, use them there. It makes quite a nice login experience, and it is a battle-tested implementation. And then, hey, you use it in WordPress too. Just enable that option, iTheme security, and you can log into your WordPress site in milliseconds.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So once again, I just dropped a link in the chat. That's Google's doc on using a passkey with your free Gmail account. Again, if you're using Google Workspace branded email with your domain with Google's infrastructure, it's not available yet. Also, using the tutorial that I just dropped in the chat the last time we did a live stream about passkeys, you can work through that process. And Stacy's having some trouble there. If you maybe try it again, Stacy, if you haven't tried it recently, and work through those steps that we talked about in that last live stream.
Yep. Reach out to support. Also try with Google. If you can say to our support that, hey, it works when I use my Google account, that helps us diagnose whether it is an issue with your device or an issue with our implementation or some combination thereof.
Yep.
But yeah, I use passkeys every day.
Very good. So get used to it, folks. This is where the world is going. Get familiar with it. If you have to upgrade your computer like Stu does, this is a good time to think about doing that. Because that is the world we're starting to live in. I've been using a Mac for years, but I actually upgraded to a touch keyboard in the last several months just to get the Touch ID, right? So it's easy to use. So, all right, folks, thanks for hanging out with us for the last hour. Great stuff, Timothy, as always. Thanks for your wisdom in the talk and in the questions and answers. We are back tomorrow with the Fly course for members talking about client consultations, and then office hours on Thursday. So thanks again for being with us for this live stream on iThemes Training, where we go further together.